Hi, my name is Trey and I'm the Extension Cotton Agronomist here at Auburn University and for Alabama Extension. And today I just want to chat with y'all a little bit about applying plant growth regulators or PGRs in cotton. And in the following slides, I've just compiled some information that is out there that will hopefully be helpful in growers making those decisions going into the 2017 season. Uh, just a little bit about PGRs in themselves. There's a few misconceptions about them out there that I wanted to clarify quickly. PGRs do not help to stimulate flowering. They do not necessarily produce more bolls. And in various studies done over the years, there's really no significant yield effect that can be seen using PGRs. It's really environmentally dependent. Um, And so PGRs alone aren't shown to have a yield benefit or reduction either way. It kind of varies depending on a lot of conditions. But why do we apply PGRs? The the main thing is that they help to improve your boll retention, especially in the lower canopy. This in turn helps to manage excessive canopy growth. And of course, by keeping your canopy growth in check, that allows a number of things to happen, including less impedance of your insecticides, fungicides, and defoliants later on. Also, by maintaining that canopy growth, you can have less boll rot incidents because there's just more air moving through that canopy, and also allows for less lodging. And it's kind of all of these things combined that help to increase the likelihood of increased yield potential at the end of the season. It's not necessarily PGRs alone, but the effect that you get from a good PGR strategy uh, will help the likelihood of yield potential. So in increasing the likelihood of yield potential, the main point on this is that boll retention is the name of the game. So in effect, your best quote unquote growth regulator is really good early season boll retention and also preventing excess nitrogen to prevent excess vegetative growth. It's really important to retain those first position bolls in the lower canopy of the crop. These bolls, when you maintain these bolls, it really tends to increase your end of season yield potential. It's kind of a catch-22 on this because while also if you lose those first position bolls, it hurts your yield potential. It will also work to spur extra vegetative growth. Once the plant loses those bolls, it kind of responds by putting on more nodes, more branches to try and make up for the loss of those bolls early in the season. And once this extra vegetative growth is initiated, it's really hard to slow down, especially later in the season. And also, through all this, the canopy management allows for effective insect disease control, as I said in the previous slide, just through effective pesticide penetration. And all of these things, again, increase your harvest efficiency and hopefully give you increased yield bump. Some things to consider also when you're looking at your PGR management strategy. Of course, are you irrigated or dryland? Irrigated producers will definitely need to have a more aggressive approach to their PGRs because they'll have better control of the soil moisture. The plant will definitely be in better growing conditions. So an effective PGR strategy is definitely needed. Your planting date, if you're planting later in the season, say after June 1st, a good PGR management strategy is going to help the earliness of that crop and make sure that you get the crop out on time. And as always, you need to look at how you're managing your crop. If you're shooting for those high yield goals in your high yield potential fields, and you're pushing those fertility inputs and others, you can expect an increased PGR application strategy to accompany that. Your variety selection also makes a difference. These days, varieties tend to have very differing vegetative growth habits and also respond differently to PGRs. So that in turn is going to require different strategies based on the varieties that you select. And environment is also a big player in this. In your fields that you have a lot of historical growth, that they, depending on the soil type, your soil or your moisture retention, and just your overall fertility and yield potential in those fields, that's going to, give you a clue as to whether a really intense strategy is going to be needed or more of a moderate strategy. And also looking at your current and future growing conditions. This year in 2017, in Alabama, we've had very excessive rainfall. So that's kind of a clue that soil moisture is probably going to be high. And right here, as we're getting into squaring around the middle of June, that vegetative growth is really going to be prolific, especially if these rains continue. So that's really going to affect the strategies that growers are currently looking at. However, if the future forecasts and long-term forecasts are showing drought, that's also going to tell you to probably pull back on those PGRs to make sure that you're not inhibiting the growth that you need to set fruit later in the season. It's important to look at the heat units you've accrued so that you know about when a plant is going to hit certain growth stages and what the potential for growth is. Again, just a reminder for a DD60 calculation, it's your maximum temperature plus your minimum temperature divided by 2 minus 60. And I'll show a chart in the next slide to kind of give you a clue on how to use those DD60 units. Again, your seasonal rainfall pattern, you know what your rainfall has been, but what is the future forecast going into the growing season? If it's looking to be high, especially for dryland producers, that's going to cause a change in strategies. But it's really important to constantly monitor your crop and take good morphological measurements. Each PGR strategy is defined based on the current growth habits in the field. So it's really important for producers to know what that is and to apply PGRs appropriately. So this is just some numbers remind you about some cotton morphology and growth stages. And you can see some of the key times to be applying PGRs is first square and first flower. And so it's important to know your heat units and your DD60s to know when about those timings should occur so that you don't get behind on those early season applications. And the slide below that is showing a pretty effective way to monitor your plant growth. And that is by looking at your hide to node ratio, which is your total plant height in inches divided by the number of nodes on the plant. And I won't go through all these numbers. You're free to read through that and evaluate it. But the three categories are what is most important to pay attention to. If you're in the normal category with your height to node ratio at those key growth stages, you can probably stick to what you're accustomed to with PGRs, probably a more moderate approach. And we'll look at these approaches in the next slide. If you're stressed, if the plant looks to not be growing as vigorously as maybe it should, it's probably time to pull back on those PGRs and look at a more cautious approach. But if you're in the vegetative, excess vegetative growth category where you have a really high height to node ratio, it's important to really look at more of an aggressive strategy. This slide goes over some relative application strategies according to varieties. But before I kind of get into this, I want to make the point that there is no defined PGR management strategy. It's very environmentally dependent. It's varietal dependent. And so it's a combination of all these things that will dictate at the end of the day how you apply PGRs. But this is kind of breaking down, as I was speaking to earlier, different varieties have different vegetative growth habits. And those are pretty well classified and known. And I encourage you to look on the different seed company websites to really know ahead of time what the growth potential is. But they kind of fall into four classes mostly. Um, the first and second class are pretty aggressively growing varieties. And those, of course, need to have multiple PGR applications, 3, perhaps even 4 and 5. Classes 3 and 4 tend to be more the early maturing, maybe less vigorous growing varieties. And those will probably need a more moderate approach, if any at all. If you're a dryland producer with early maturing, not aggressively growing varieties, of course, you may not even need a PGR application. But again, that's dependent on your environment and your growth habit, which I encourage you to monitor throughout the season. But one common theme throughout this slide is that no matter which strategy you're looking at, if you're going to apply PGRs, it's critical to get them out at least before first bloom. With the more aggressively growing varieties, you need to get that out right at squaring prior to bloom. This slide is showing in more detail your rate strategy that you would want to use along with your application, your number of applications and the strategy you choose for that. I won't go over this entire slide, but it's just to show that if you take a more moderate application strategy, you'll probably want to use a little bit higher rate. There's 2 different types of products out there: mepiquat chloride, which is most of your traditional PGRs, and stance, which is a slightly different formulation. But your stance rates are probably a little more fixed. Anywhere from 2 to 3 ounces at a time is all you need to apply. But as you go into your multiple low rate applications, you'll want to bring that rate down on your mepiquat chloride, especially to 2 to 4 ounces in those first couple of applications, and then increase that as the plant gets larger, from 4 to 8. As that plant gets larger, it takes a higher rate of mepiquat in order to slow that plant down. And you think of it more of like a concentration type thing. The bigger the plant is, the higher the rate that you'll need. But a take home on this, do not apply more than 3 pints an acre of mepiquat chloride in a season, or more than 22 ounces of stance per growing season. Any more than that will stress the crop unnecessarily. And also, do not apply over a half a pint of mepiquat chloride if you're in drought stress. Again, that drought stress is enough to control your vegetative growth, and there's really no need to overstress the plant at that point. So this year in 2017 in Alabama, we are most decidedly in an excessive rainfall pattern. So there's some points for this year that growers in Alabama, I think, need to take account of. Dryland producers are probably most going to be affected by this, because their strategy is probably going to need to change from what they're accustomed to. With these very high amounts of rainfall, it's likely that dryland producers are going to get more vegetative and overall plant growth than they're accustomed to. So it's extremely important to monitor those plants now, especially here starting at squaring, for any abnormal excessive growth. And it's likely that if you notice any of that excessive growth, you'll need to shift from a more moderate PGR strategy to an aggressive one. And it's important to be making those decisions early in the season to start getting those multiple low rate applications out early. But this is also for all producers that need to continue your consistent plant monitoring, and so you'll be able to catch any abnormal growth that's out there. And also, just to reiterate this point, getting your first PGR application before bloom is crucial to control late season growth. And I know this becomes even more difficult in a rainy year because it's obviously more difficult to get in the field. That's why it's important to know what your growth is out in the field, so that when the weather does clear up and you get a window to spray, you make sure you got a PGR in the tank. You can't rely alone on late season high rate applications of PGRs to control growth. You may be able to initiate an early cutout, but by that point, you've kind of lost the objective on maintaining your bowl retention in that lower canopy, which is actually what it works more to give you an increased yield bump than anything else. So to summarize some of these points and to give you some take-home messages on when exactly you need to apply these, um, a couple of things to look at. So height, if you measure your plant height to be 25 to 30 inches or greater during that first week of bloom, it's time to get a PGR out there. Nodes above white flower. So right at first bloom, if you've got greater than 9 to 10 nodes above that first bloom, with optimum growth conditions looking favorable, then it's also time to get your PGR out there. Your square and fruit retention, if it is low, and by low I mean 50 to 75%, or of course less, at that first bloom stage with high soil moisture, it's definitely time to get a PGR out there, because that means that plant is responding to that fruit loss by putting on more nodes, and that's almost guaranteed. So an application is advisable. And also the internode distance, 3 to 5 inches between that fourth and fifth leaf from the terminal. If you've got a node that's 3 to 5 inches, then that gives you a good clue that you've got some excess growth going on in there. So I'll end with that. Thanks for your attention. And here's my contact information. If you've got any questions on things I did or did not cover, feel free to contact me. Thanks so much.